Can a good Christian be a good lawyer? Just hearing that question probably stirs up a lot of thoughts, maybe even some assumptions about both professions. It's kind of a provocative question, isn't it?
It absolutely is, yeah. And for this deep dive, we're not really setting out to give you a definitive yes or no answer. Instead, our goal is more to explore how legal professionals from diverse Christian traditions have personally wrestled with this very challenging question. The sources we've looked at are, well, they're a collection of deeply personal reflections, essentially, people's stories of their faith journey within their legal careers.
That's right. So our mission today is to unpack these insights. We want to offer you a shortcut, to understanding the surprising connections, the inherent tensions, and maybe the profound ways faith can truly shape the pursuit of justice in the legal world. Ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so many of the sources we looked at, they bring up this common public perception that law and faith are, well, inherently contradictory. There's a great humorous but also pointed quip from a divinity professor that captures this perfectly. When asked about a student studying both law and divinity, he replied, "Law and divinity aren't those contradictory?" And then he followed it up, booming, "I fear we have pollution." It's quite an image, right?
It really is. And, that quip points to a very real tension. It has deep historical and intellectual roots. There's what some call the post-Enlightenment suspicion, this idea coming out of the Enlightenment, which, emphasized human reason, individual autonomy. And that often led to a skepticism kind of explicit religious values in public life. Plus, on top of that, you have this deep-seated theological axiom that divine law is superior to the law of the state.
Oh.
And these two things, they often create this internal conflict for religious legal professionals trying to uphold both.
Right. So how does that actually play out for them day to day? What kind of internal struggle do they talk about when trying to bring their faith into their work?
Well, it often leads to feelings of being internally divided or conflicted, maybe, in their professional lives. There's this real battle to reconcile the demands of the legal system with their, deeply held spiritual convictions. Some even feel that explicitly linking faith and work would just be seen as, well, unprofessional in certain circles.
That sounds like a really challenging space to navigate. So to really get a feel for this tension and, see how people wrestle with it, let's get into some of those deeply personal accounts from the sources. These stories, they really reveal the raw reality of how faith impacts everything, from high stakes criminal defense down to the seemingly small moments of daily practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Take the anonymous lawyer's account of the Juan Alejandro case. It's pretty stark. He was defending a client with, I think it was a 3.5-page rap sheet, charges ranging from murder to child molesting. Really serious stuff. But despite the awful nature of the accusations, the lawyer, who was, interestingly, exploring Anglican Christianity at the time, he had this profound, almost involuntary spiritual moment. He found himself spontaneously praying for mercy to a Christ in him, referring to the client. It was this powerful, palpable experience of faith right there in a deeply challenging professional setting, grace showing up unexpectedly.
Wow. That story really does highlight grace appearing in, well, unlikely places. And then there's the Mr. Woods guardianship case. Here, the lawyer felt absolutely empty and helpless. This was after a judge told his client, a father who had done, quote, a horrible thing, to basically cease to exist in his children's lives. The lawyer knew he had no case legally and nothing to win, yet he felt committed to just sit with him, to be his advocate and in some sense his friend. What does a story like that really tell us about the essence of advocacy, even when legal victory seems impossible? How does this maybe redefine success for these lawyers?
That's a great question. I think it shifts the definition of a success. It moves away from just winning cases to something more like demonstrating presence, compassion, human dignity. For that lawyer, it was about fulfilling a calling, being a faithful presence, regardless of the legal outcome. Nancy Miller Herron also talks about a similar kind of struggle. She calls it the tyranny of the urgent. She was juggling so many demanding roles: lawyer, bank board chair, author, and mother of 3 young kids. And she emphasizes this constant struggle to prioritize the better over just the urgent. What got her through a high-risk pregnancy, she said, was community prayers. It reminded her that she didn't actually have to pray for herself. Her community was carrying that for her.
That's powerful. And that idea of identity really comes through too. Teresa Stanton Klatt offers a critical insight here, doesn't she? That lawyers often mistakenly identify themselves primarily as what we do, a lawyer rather than what we are. In her case, a woman of God blessed with a family. How do the sources suggest lawyers kind of push back against that professional pressure? That pressure to maybe compromise their core values? Like in Colette's example, where a female colleague actually asked if she would have an abortion just to make a partner.
Yeah, it really underscores the immense pressure they can face. Colette's experience shows that constant internal negotiation that's required. She also shared another story, a guardianship case, where her initial assessment was that the client's mother was lucid. But later she discovered these windows of lucidity, basically, periods of clear thought mixed with confusion. This discovery forced Colette to completely reevaluate her ethical obligations and, importantly, the firm's role. It ultimately led her to challenge the expectations of a powerful client. It really shows how moral discernment plays out in the nitty-gritty of practice, even when it means pushing back against pressure.
Right. What were the potential professional repercussions for Colette in challenging a powerful client like that? Did the sources talk about how she navigated that?
They don't detail the examined professional fallout, no. But the implication is clear. Doing something like that could risk client relationships, maybe even your standing within a firm. Her navigating it, though, it really speaks to a deeply held ethical commitment. It seems she prioritized the client's true best interest over the firm's immediate, maybe, financial gain or convenience. It was an act of integrity, really driven by her values.
That is a powerful example of integrity. William Bentley Ball's journey also shows a pretty profound shift over time. His legal work changed focus, moving towards First Amendment liberties and defending the sacredness of human life, which for him included advocating for the civil rights of Black people and the unborn. He reflected later that while law can definitely deepen the mind, it can also, quote, narrow it. That prompted some powerful reflection for him on what truly matters in later life.
Absolutely. And then there's Tom H. Matheny.
Yeah.
His story is incredible. He faced actual KKK threats because of his anti-discrimination stance. He even humorously hosted a cross-burning party that the Klan, well, never showed up for, which apparently ruined what he called a major social event.
That's one way to handle it.
Right. It just perfectly illustrates his core belief in doing the right thing and seeking truth, even under really significant pressure. He also talked about finding strength in finding the humor in situations and relying on a merry heart, especially when dealing with a particularly crafty opposing lawyer.
Finding levity in adversity sounds like a pretty crucial coping mechanism in a tough profession like law. We also hear from an anonymous legal aid lawyer. She talked about feeling ill-equipped initially to deal with the complex issues of poverty and race, yet she found this deep inspiration in legal aid work. She saw it very directly as doing the Lord's work. And she gave concrete examples of the impact, like getting medical coverage for families, securing disability benefits, and even influencing Medicaid design in a way that ended up covering, I think it was 400,000 uninsured people. Just incredible impact.
Yeah, really tangible results. Another unique perspective came from a lobbyist. His LDS faith emphasizes patriotic duty and nonpartisanship. He talks about his work on repealing the Edmunds-Tucker Act. That was an old act designed to suppress the LDS Church's practice of polygamy by disincorporating the church and seizing its assets. His success, he felt, was built largely on his reputation for truthfulness and, importantly, nonpartisanship. It shows how faith can influence public policy through principled engagement rather than trying to impose religious views directly.
That's a really interesting distinction. And finally, there's a truly powerful story from the nun's lawyer. She worked to oppose the death penalty for her client, despite the absolutely heinous nature of the crime, the rape and murder of a nun. She was driven by the murdered nun's own commitment to nonviolence. She shared how the global religious community just responded with this outcry against the execution. Calls and faxes pouring in from everywhere, including, quote, a nun in Peru. This story just starkly highlights the conflict, doesn't it, between legal retribution and a faith-based stance on the sanctity of life.
It really does. These personal narratives, they paint such a rich picture, a real tapestry of experiences. They also lead us towards a helpful framework that came up in the sources. It identifies basically 3 distinct models for how legal professionals integrate faith in work. The first one is called, "The law is my employer." Lawyers in this model, they tend to believe the legal system itself, with its objective rules, ultimately produces justice. So their duty is to zealously protect their client while serving the system.
It's famously articulated by Thomas More, right? Yes, I'd give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake.
Right, that's a very pragmatic rule of law kind of approach. What are the strengths, maybe, and the potential limitations of operating under that model?
Well, the strength, I think, lies in upholding the integrity of the legal process itself, making sure everyone gets due process. It allows lawyers to operate within the system as it currently exists, trusting its mechanisms. The limitation, perhaps, is that it might not always align with a lawyer's personal moral compass, especially if they believe the system itself is flawed or maybe produces unjust outcomes in certain situations.
Okay. Then there's the second model. God is my employer. These lawyers, the sources say, often work exclusively pro bono. They see their work as a direct, very literal response to the gospel's call for radical love, compassion, and justice. And they frequently express deep reservations about the legal system itself, maybe seeing it as inherently flawed or even unjust. What are the practical realities of choosing a path like that? What kind of cases do these lawyers typically take on? And I guess, what sacrifices do they make?
Yeah, the practical reality is often one of significant financial sacrifice. Their work just isn't profit-driven in the same way. They typically take on cases addressing systemic injustices, advocating for the marginalized, issues of poverty, human rights, social inequality. The sacrifice is often personal comfort, maybe professional advancement within traditional law firms. Their reward, I suppose, comes from living out their convictions so directly.
Right. And finally, the third model, God is my partner. These lawyers see God as a creator and themselves as participants, kind of in God's ongoing work of bringing order and incremental progress to the world. Their focus is more on competence, integrity, helping clients discern just claims within a broader ethical context. They believe that ordinary, everyday work can gradually build the kingdom. How does this model foster that incremental progress? And how does it really differ from the other two?
Well, it differs because it's less about serving the system sort of blindly, like the first model might imply sometimes. And it's less about rejecting the system entirely, like the second model often does. God is my partner. Kind of acknowledges the imperfections of the system, but seeks to improve it from within. Through daily acts of integrity, competence, ethical discernment, it's about finding those opportunities for justice and compassion in every client interaction, every brief filed, every negotiation, contributing to gradual, maybe, but still meaningful positive change.
As you hear about these three different approaches, the law is my employer, God is my partner, which model, sparks the most thought for you? Or maybe aligns with how you see purpose in your own work? It's not really about choosing one single path, I guess, but recognizing the diverse ways people try to live out their values.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And speaking of daily practice, there's an anonymous judge in the sources who shared a really profound belief. He said that the rank you give yourself in creation matters greatly, especially for judges. He apparently prays daily for wisdom, specifically as an antidote for the deadly disease of arrogance. It really illustrates that constant need for humility, especially in a position of significant power.
Wow, that's incredible self-awareness for someone in that role. Then there's that poignant little story, the coughing stenographer anecdote. A lawyer simply gives a struggling stenographer a small cup of water in a crowded courtroom. It's described as an embarrassingly simple act, but it serves as a parable about misplaced priorities. What does this embarrassingly simple act really reveal about how these individuals embody their faith, in those small, often overlooked moments of professional life?
I think it highlights that faith isn't just for the big gestures or the courtroom dramas, right? It demands attention to people's needs, even in the mundane, everyday stuff. It's about seeing the human being right there in front of you, regardless of their role, and responding with basic compassion. And this ties into the broader challenge discussed in the sources, how work can become either a curse, just a grim necessity you have to get through, or an idol, the thing that becomes your entire source of self-worth and maybe even salvation. The sources really emphasize the importance of breaking down artificial barriers between faith and work, recognizing that, God is the God of the whole week, not only Sundays. We shouldn't compartmentalize our lives like that.
That definitely sounds easier said than done, especially in really demanding professions. So how do these sources suggest we actively build resilience, maintain spiritual sanity, especially in those high-pressure environments?
They offer some really practical advice, actually. Things like actively disengaging from work, really switching off, seeking community with friends, maybe friends who share similar values, who get it, and intentionally creating a personal office environment that reminds you that work isn't the only thing, or even the most important thing in your life.
Bring in those pictures of family or, like the source mentioned, maybe a silly Star Trek figure if that helps. It's about creating that mental and physical space to remember your true priorities.
Right. And ultimately, it seems the goal isn't necessarily about achieving dramatic effectiveness, but more about faithfulness in whatever your calling is. It really ties back to that powerful Mother Teresa quote mentioned, God calls us to be faithful, not effective.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's about being faithful to your values, faithful to your calling, your community. Knowing that true impact isn't always something you can easily measure or quantify.
So, this whole deep dive, it's really shown us that the question, can a good Christian be a good lawyer, isn't about finding some simple yes or no. It's much more about embracing a complex, really dynamic journey. A journey of striving to align our professional lives with our deepest values, even when that's incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it's a continuous process, isn't it?
A trove, yeah.
In self-discovery, and it's filled with both triumphs and, missteps along the way. Alan W. Perry's summation of his own journey really captures this so well. He said, "Oh God, I ain't what I ought to be, and I ain't what I'm gonna be, but by your grace, I ain't what I used to be."
Oh.
It just reflects that ongoing nature of personal and spiritual development, acknowledging that we fail, but we keep growing.
That's beautifully put. So as you listening, reflect on your own work, whatever your profession might be, maybe consider this. How might your daily tasks, the people you interact with, even your professional struggles, how might they be an unacknowledged part of a larger ongoing story of grace and purpose? What seemingly small act of compassion or integrity today might actually be a profound expression of your deepest beliefs, something to think about.